I have the honor to introduce our keynote address speaker, Dr. Scarlett Bellamy. Scarlett is a graduate of Hampton University with a degree in mathematics, a graduate of Harvard University, her PhD in biostatistics. She spent her first 15 years in her faculty career at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine, where she was the first African American to be promoted to associate professor. And she is ENAR past president. So those are some of the things you'll read in her bio. But what I want to share with you all, I talked about the community. Scarlett's one of the reasons that I stand here today. When after my junior year in college, I got to go to the Harvard summer program, and actually another person who I meet, Dr. DeJoran Richardson, was the professor teaching us biostatistics, and it was my first introduction to biostatistics. So DeJoran's teaching was part of what made me fall in love with biostatistics. I was a double major in math, secondary mathematics education, didn't know what I wanted to do with my math. I actually had 3 majors, math, psychology, education, because I just had no idea. I knew I wanted to teach, so going to the Harvard summer program, and we have a part today to talk about summer programs and opportunities. We have a lot of sponsors, vendors, we have internships, but that's how I fell in love with biostatistics. But Scarlett was one of the graduate students, Scarlett Bellamy, and a Dr. Nashawn Morales, who that summer reached out and made personal connections. And again, I got to look and see them and see, like, wow, it's possible that I can do this, and I can get, go into a graduate program because they're there, and they're supportive, and they're still normal, right? And so Scarlett reached out to me. Then, when I was finishing my PhD from Emory, I applied to a faculty position at Penn. And I ended up being offered the position, and that's where my first faculty position was. Later on, I found out that Scarlett sat on that search committee, and later on, other members said, that Scarlett was one of the people who made sure that your application got the attention. So here's a tip for everybody out there. The deadline was January 30th. And I turned mine in January 15th, which was on time, right? Yeah, sort of. But there were also many, many more talented people who had already turned in theirs. And so mine was in the later batch, and some people were tired, and they had stopped reading the later batch, but not Scarlett. And so I didn't know that she made sure that everyone gave my application a fair chance. Then my first faculty position, when I got there, spring semester, I remember Scarlett coming in my office, and she was like, "Renee, so I'd like to ask you to be on the ENAR Fostering Diversity in Biostatistics Planning Committee." And for those of you not familiar with ENAR, it's the Eastern North American region of the International Biometrics Society, and it's the largest biostatistics organization. That meeting is in March, and one of our committee members, Dr. Felicia Griffin, and Dr. Portia Exum are there. You have that flyer. But Scarlett came, she said, and she must have saw the look on my face, because I was like, I just got here, and I'm trying to transition from grad student to faculty, and she said, "I promise you right now it won't be a lot, but I would like you to be involved in the committee." And I'll also say, as an undergrad, I actually attended my senior year, the ENAR Diversity Workshop, and like this forum today, it helped me to decide which graduate school to go to, and I went to Emory. And so, she kind of said, "Remember you attended as an undergrad, and we want, your energy. I promise it won't be a lot." And I just looked at her, and little did I know part of that, and now I do it. Scarlett had me in mind to be a future chair of the ENAR Diversity Workshop, and so that was my formal introduction into being on the organizing committees for diversity initiatives in our field. And so if you get tired of hearing me today, then blame Scarlett. She got me into this. But Scarlett's career has been dedicated to the recruitment and retaining diverse students in the statistical sciences and data science. And programs like this. She is the principal investigator of the grant for the ENAR Diversity Workshop who brings students in. So you can read her bio, but that's the important part to me, is that she's one of the leaders in this initiative and having us here today. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Scarlett Bellamy, who is now at Drexel University.
All right. Let me figure out how to make this big. There we go. All right. So I will admit, thank you, Renee, for that introduction. I've never had Renee introduce me before, and I have to tell you, when I found out last night that that was going to happen and that she was going to go off script, I got really nervous. Yeah. But it's all good. You know, I like to think of like mentoring as not sort of like, you know, like guiding people to be like me, which is how some people think of mentoring, and that's okay. But I sort of think of mentoring as sort of guiding people to be the best them. And Renee is also a good example of, you know, I'm really proud of sort of how we've been connected and to sort of see your sort of career and trajectory over the years too. So thank you. The admiration and appreciation goes both ways. To what I'm supposed to, I also have to say that this is I can't believe that this is my very first StatFest. So for anybody in the room who, and I said this to a student last night, who 20 years from now, when we're at StatFest together, we can look at each other and say, we were at the first StatFest together 20 years ago. So I hope to sort of, you know, remedy that and make sure that I sort of come to these more often, because just sort of seeing you is sort of, you know, it's very inspiring. It sort of reminds me of sort of why it is that, you know, we do what we do. So this is sort of the title of my, you know, presentation for the next few minutes. The other thing that Renee is really good at is keeping me on time. And she knows that she can actually come up here and like smack me around a little bit okay. So I want to start this talk also by saying that, you know, I'm used to the sort of more technical and scientific talks. When Nick and Brittany asked me to sort of do something a little bit more on sort of the personal and journey side, originally I said, yes, I can do that. And then when I started preparing, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, it's a little vulnerable to open up to like some of the good, the bad, and the ugly about sort of, you know, how one gets to where they are. But in the sake of, you know, I'm also one that believes in representation. So in that spirit, I think it's important to tell people that, you know, statistics and being a professional sort of statistician is great, but everything about it is not always great. And so, but many of us who do it sort of are still, you know, in the business of being sort of statisticians. So that is sort of the spirit of where, you know, my next few remarks are going to come from. In that same spirit, I also believe in transparency. So this is sort of my, you know, my disclosures, right? So this is a single experience, and it's based on, you know, how I was trained, and Renee talked about all that stuff. You know, up until 2.5 or 2 years ago, when I switched from being a professor at Penn to a professor at Drexel, my parents would tell you I only had one job, right? So that's also important to know. My experience has been as an academician, and so if you talk to other people, they may have different ones. And I've only been at 2 places, right? So I've been in a large urban medical center. That was my life at Penn. And now I've moved back over to sort of a medium-sized school of public health. So my sort of, you know, my lens is through those two. Those are 2 lenses that sort of my career has been shaped around. I am also a person who operates always with a plan B in mind. So if stuff doesn't work out on the path that I'm taking, I always am comfortable with thinking about getting out of that sort of situation, right? So a lot of people, and again, they're sort of narrowly focused, and they're only going to go down that path. That's not me. So when I first started out, you know, honestly, I didn't think I'd be in academics this long, but I'm still here. Because my thing was like, you know, the advice I got was that after graduate school, if I even wanted to think about being in academics, that I should do that first, because it was sort of easier, and I don't know that I believe that anymore, but it was easier to sort of go from academics to something else rather than the reverse. So I always thought I was going to hit the reverse, but, you know, here I am many years later, and I'm still in academia. But it's, again, the point is that I always knew that for me, if it didn't work out, I was not going to be upset if I had to sort of change paths. The other thing that I was telling somebody just this morning, I struggled to put this last bullet point on the page, but it's something, again, in the spirit of representation, that I'm now more comfortable with doing, right? So I make it a point to tell people that, you know, I am not wedded to this job. I'm not wedded to my career as much as I enjoy it. I enjoy spending time with my family, and this is my little family. This was us on vacation, not too far from here. We were on the Cape a couple weeks ago. I enjoy spending time with those guys as much as I enjoy being in the office and doing all those other things that go along with being in the office. And I think maybe particularly for people who are in academia, that's sort of the hard thing to sort of say publicly. But now that I'm promoted and all that other stuff, it appears on the slide. So real quick, I'm gonna assume, so there were so many undergraduates in the room, I'm gonna assume that some of this is new, but I'm gonna go through it fairly quickly. So we've talked about ASA, which is the statistical organization. You heard a little bit about ENAR was thrown in there, which is sort of more sort of oriented around biometrics and biostatistics. So the question may be in some of your minds, sort of what is biostatistics, and maybe more subtly, how's it different than statistics? And the short answer, here are lots of different definitions, but in my mind, the short answer is sort of the difference in the two. The training is nearly identical for statisticians versus biostatisticians. The difference comes in sort of the problems that we work on, right? So biostatistics sort of is more focused on research related to the biomedical sciences, so health, medicine, those types of things. And statistics are those things plus everything else. So it's really just sort of the training and the skill sets are nearly identical, just sort of the applications are where some of the differences may lie. Again, really quickly, how we're typically trained. Biostatistics, there are very few undergraduate programs in biostatistics, whereas probably there are tons of undergraduate programs in statistics. Where we sort of, you know, come in terms of how we train students is more so at the graduate level. And there are different kinds of, like, you know, both at the master's and the PhD level. So there are different flavors of master's degrees. Some places award MPHs or different flavors of Masters of Science degrees. And then there's doctoral degrees, so PhDs and the equivalent. So did anybody catch that my degree is not a PhD? Does anybody wonder why that is? One person, thank you. I will answer that question for you. So it turns out that until probably within the last like 10 or 12 years, so I trained at the Harvard School of Public Health, and Harvard granted degrees in biostatistics that were Doctor of Science degrees and not Doctor of Philosophy degrees. And there were very few places that where if you sort of, it was sort of this, as a graduate of Harvard, it was sort of this really, and as somebody who's naturally sort of an introvert, it was sort of this way where if you said biostatistics and SCD, people knew that you went to Harvard without actually having to say it out loud, kind of. So really, the point is that and now Harvard offers PhD degrees, and part of that sort of transition was because nobody understood what this. Once people started taking jobs outside of academia, people didn't know what this SCD thing was about. And so there were probably many reasons, but one of them was to sort of make the degree more recognizable. The training is nearly identical then and now. So that's really the long story behind the difference of degrees in that one in particular. And then we work in places where you think there's sort of three big buckets. There's academia, where I am, and you can be in academia in lots of different flavors, including different departments, whether you're at an undergraduate, primarily granting institution, a graduate granting institution, some mix of the two. A lot of us go back to stat or math departments, and some of us are at research-intensive institutions and others at teaching-intensive institutions, and sort of everything in between. Lots of us go and take positions in governmental organizations at the various levels. Obviously industry, including, these sort of big which is maybe relevant to many of you, big data technology companies. So like we have lots of people who we send off to like Google and Amazon and like, the ride sharing, Uber and Lyft. And then this one I could never do, but like a lot of us actually go off and work for ourselves. So do various forms of consulting. So in a nutshell, regardless of what bin you end up in, where we often work is, or biostatisticians, I think, are by nature more collaborative. So we work in sort of multidisciplinary teams on all these kinds of problems. A big part of what we do is which is the theoretical various flavors of theoretical research, where we are developing better ways to sort of design studies and analyze data. Teaching is a big part of what we do in various forms, even sort of regardless of, even if you're outside of academia, a lot of the teaching comes in sort of teaching people the language so that you can sort of communicate with them and work on that first bullet collaboratively. So you have to teach them a little bit of stat speak while they're teaching you a little bit about the applications that you're working on. We do lots of training, and we do lots of communication. So both verbally and in writing. And again, these things are probably not new ideas. So that's sort of the get us on the same page thing. So this is the part where I get a little nervous. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to be, sort of where I am today. So starting in the way back, does anybody recognize what this plant is? I heard it, right. It's tobacco, right? So for better or for worse, I like to tell people, so I grew up in rural North Carolina. My father's parents were farmers, and our primary crop was tobacco for a long time. So for better or for worse, this kid who grew up on a tobacco producing farm is now a public health research scientist. And so, but honestly, I loved it. I wouldn't change anything about my time growing up. So anyway, so I was born in rural North Carolina. Consequently, I grew up about 40 miles outside of Wilmington. And if you remember from last week, Florence came through and did a number. But I'm happy to report that my grandmother, who's 87 and on dialysis, she only got she got her power back and her phone back on Wednesday morning. So I'm happy that they're recovering, although it will be a long time till they're sort of fully back up to speed. But that's sort of an aside. In some ways, so I mentioned my grandmother because my parents were really young when I was born. I think my dad was 18 and my mom was 17, and I don't know, like, nobody says this exactly, explicitly, but they weren't expecting me to come along. So so I actually spent the first probably 10 years of my life in between living with both my maternal and my paternal grandparents. Now, on some level, like, when I think back on it, I was like, that probably isn't, like, when I think about my kid, that's not what I would want for him. But for me, it was really, I really liked it. I thought it was the coolest thing ever to grow up with your grandparents. So I spent time between the two. And then when I was sort of, 7, 8 years old, I don't fully remember exactly what happened. My grandmother, my father's mother, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And this is sort of key because, you know, I loved my grandma Vivian, and when she got sick, and sort of when people, the grown-ups, communicated to me the sickness, and I got a sense of how serious it was, and that we were likely going to lose her, you know, my thing in my sort of 8-year-old way, I went to her and I was like, look, if you can hang on, I'm going to go to medical school. I didn't even know what I was talking about. I'm going to be a doctor. And I'm gonna fix you, right? No, having no idea, like I'm 7, right? Talking about hold on for after this serious diagnosis, but I sort of promised her that I would become a doctor and I'd come back and fix her, and you know, and that never came to be. She passed away when I was 10, but this sort of, you know, idea and this promise that I made to my grandmother when I was 7 or 8 is sort of always been sort of lingering in the back of my mind. So that didn't happen, and after she passed away, my dad got married shortly after that, and then he was sort of more, you know, had a better capacity to, you know, to be a parent. So I went and lived with my dad and my stepmom. So I didn't learn this part until pretty late. So I actually learned maybe, I don't know, when I was probably in college, that I have like this history of math in my family that's pretty strong, right? So, and it's all from my father's side, not that that's sort of relevant, but, you know, so my father's grandmother taught mathematics to, you know, it was a school. It wasn't sort of distinguished in those days in rural North Carolina. She taught math for professionally, which was striking in many ways in that, you know, she had a proper profession outside of being a homemaker, and she taught math. I didn't even know where she learned math and to know it well enough to teach it, but that's what she did. My grandfather's brother, also on my father's side, he taught high school math, and I do remember, I have some, you know, memory of my Uncle Jake and being a math teacher. And then more closely to me, my Aunt May, she has a master's degree in mathematics from North Carolina Central University, so an HBCU, and she sort of was on faculty there, and for many years she taught in the math department. And I was really close to my Aunt May, and so I would go and spend summers there in Durham with her, and she usually taught some summer course or summer school, and she would invite me along to sit in the class. And I think at some point she noticed that like I was paying attention to what she was teaching. It was usually algebra or like, you know, some college level calculus course. And she would, you know, again, I think of this as a nudge, but she would ask me after all the students were gone to like help her grade the homework, right? Or I think I got this one right. Can you, you know, help me look at the solution? So she was kind of like gently encouraging me to do math, and I really liked it. She was also pretty well connected in Durham, so she actually had a friend who was an MD over at Duke, and I had always expressed this idea of wanting to go to medical school, and so she had me talk to this guy. I can't remember his name. I should have asked her about it before this talk, but anyway, she had me talk to this guy, and he told me that, look, if you like math, then do math. We'll teach you how to be a doctor in medical school. I just wanted you to get the best grades that you can and prove that you are a strong student, and everything that you need to learn to be a doctor, we'll teach you in medical school. So like to me, that was like so liberating, because like the idea of doing something different like pre-med or biology or some of those other things that we think about as sort of degrees that lead to medical school, he was saying, no, just do what you're good at. Continue to do what you're good at. So that was great. In high school, I liked math, and obviously I had planted this seed that, like, you know, math was for me early, but I was never the best student in any of my classes, but I worked really hard, and so as a result, I did pretty well. And then that leads to so then I went on to be a math major at Hampton. And again, another sort of nudge, I did well enough to get this scholarship, to study mathematics at Hampton. And as a part of the scholarship, you had to do these like research internships every summer starting your sophomore year. And at some point, again, full disclosure, with my plan B in mind, I was like, okay, obviously I'm not going to turn down this full ride to, get my degree, but I have no interest in going on to graduate school, mostly because I didn't understand what it was, like what it meant, or what it would get me. I was like, but if they tell me I have to do this intern stuff and do research over the summer in order to keep my scholarship, I'll do that. And so when I was a junior, the summer before my junior year, because again, remember my story is I'm originally from North Carolina, and Nashawn, who Renee mentioned earlier, she and I were roommates in math. We were in the same department at Hampton, and we had to do all the same stuff because we were on the same scholarship. And again, Hampton's math department was small. When I graduated, I was a class of 5, right? And Nashawn and I were really good friends. She's also from North Carolina, so we're like, we have to do this internship. There was a program, there was a summer research experience at UNC. Let's apply there, and if they accept us, let's go together. So we at least have each other on this huge, very different, not HBCU campus for, 10 weeks out of the summer. So that's what we did. And again, just by luck, so you apply to a summer research experience, and you're placed with a professor based on the availability of faculty who say they have a summer research experience. And so I was matched with this guy, Lloyd Edwards, in biostatistics. And that was the first time I'd ever even heard of biostatistics, and over the summer, I learned what it was. And so as soon as I had this experience, I was like, oh, this is how I get to do my math stuff and my sort of medical stuff in the same thing, so I can keep my promise to my grandma. So many years later, I ended up, as a result of those experiences in the summer, I ended up as a biostat major at Harvard, and that's another long story that if you're interested in, I can tell you in one of the breaks. So now I get to, and Nick reminded me, my logo for Harvard is not correct anymore. So technically now they're the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, but I knew it as the Harvard School of Public Health, so I like this one. So I ended up at I shouldn't say that. I chose to go to graduate school at Harvard. And again, remember Nashawn from math and Hampton? Again, we decided that we were both, because we both had the same bug. We both loved our experience with Lloyd in the summer programs at UNC. So we're like, look, let's make our own social network, right? So if we're both gonna, sign up and study biostatistics in graduate school, wouldn't it be great, again, if we sort of went with our own network, somebody we already knew, let's go together. So we applied to all the same places. Thankfully, we got into all the same places. And collectively, we chose to go to Harvard. Just a quick side story, and you can ask me about it later. Part of the choosing involved a coin flip. That's all I'll say about that. So that was part of the choosing the graduate program. And I'm here to tell you, so there are mostly undergraduates in the room. Don't be fooled. Being on this side of graduate school is great, but graduate school is also really challenging. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it's doable. All of us have done it, right? I want you to understand that you can do it. I also want you to understand what you're getting into when you sign up for it. And Nick can attest to this. So the general format for like training this is particularly around getting your doctoral degree, is usually like there's like the first 2 years you're in courses with what seems probably like a light course load. Usually it's like 3 courses per term, whatever terms you're on, or, whether you're on a quarter or semester system. And I have to say that first thing, at first blush, when I transitioned from undergrad to graduate school, it's like 3 classes. Oh, I got this. 3 classes as a graduate student is, It's more challenging than I was. Speaking from the I, it's more challenging than I sort of appreciated at first. Then you have to take some exam. Usually it's a written qualifying exam, and you have to pass that exam. And there are different flavors of qualifying exams. You have to pass that exam before you can move on. And move on meaning you get to start doing dissertation research, which I'll tell you as an undergraduate, again, I didn't fully appreciate this until, much later in the experience maybe than some of my classmates. But it's in this dissertation writing research experience where the goal is for you to know more about something than your advisor. I sort of it took me a little time to get there because I kept going to my advisors like when I was stuck and was like, I need you to help me get over this. And she would gently push it back and say, no, this is your work to do. And I think that's sort of it's something that you have to sort of know mentally going into the process that in terms of knowledge, at some point you're expected to sort of overtake your advisor, okay? And that was new to me. And then there's some final, exam. Usually it's a dissertation defense, and then you're done. Well, that's sort of how it's supposed to go. For me, it went like this. So in the courses, despite, having great TAs like Nick Horton, who I think TA'd probably 3 of my classes as a graduate student, I did okay. So some of the classes I did really well in, but some of them, I was just happy that I got a B and they let me move on. And that's the other thing in grad school. B's are kind of like you're aiming for A's, and B's are like, they're okay, but I don't want to hold them up in the program. So I had sort of a mix of A's and B's, so I thought I was sort of average in the courses. I did better in the applied courses. The theory ones I sort of struggle with, and that's just my story. This qualifying exam thing, remember, you can't move forward until you pass it, right? And some places have a limit on how many times you are allowed to take this exam. At Harvard, it was 2. I had to take it twice, right? So the first time I didn't get through, and remember that buddy Nashawn, she did, and I was crushed. I have to say that a big part of keeping going was to get over that, at some point now we were sort of separating a little bit. So that's the bad news. The good news is that, I don't know, for better or for worse, I have feelings about these qualifying exam things now, but for better or for worse, the second time I was so motivated, and I was like, if I don't get through with this time, I got to go home or I got to go someplace else, but I got the prize. So at Harvard, you get a prize for having the best score. So I got the prize the next time around. So that was a good thing. That was a sort of morale boost after sort of a morale low just the year before. The other thing too is that these qualifying exams aren't offered very often. So there was a whole year between taking it the first time and the second time because they're usually only offered once a year at most places. So I felt, again, graduate school, even though my friend and I had gone into it together, it's a really personalized experience. People go through it fast, some people go through it slow. I ended up being one of the slow ones, and partly it was because of this year thing that had to happen in between the first and second time I took the exam. Then I got to the dissertation thing, and people will tell you and I won't spend a lot of time on this because a lot of you aren't there yet, but people have a lot of different sort of, opinions about how you choose a dissertation advisor. My path was I just chose somebody I liked, right? I chose the person who, after I didn't pass the first time, they were so it was Louise Ryan. She was very supportive throughout my whole graduate career. And I was like, if it's all the same to you, and I wasn't begging, but I was like, if it's all the same to you, I was like, I just want to work with you because I sort of, obviously you are invested in me getting done. And that's all I want to do is get done. And she was like, sure. So she was like, are you sure? Because then she tried to spin it well, you got the prize. A lot of people are going to work with you. You should at least talk to them. I was like, I'm good. If you say yes, this is all the talk I need to do. And she did, and that was my advisor. So there are lots of different ways you can choose your advisor. I chose the one I liked. And then, I can't remember the order of these things, but at some point after you start doing your dissertation, I think of it as a check-in exam, or at least that was the process at Harvard. You had to do this oral exam that sort of moved you from one status in the dissertation process to another. And for most people, it was kind of like pro forma. You got it scheduled, everybody said okay, and then so I got there and I got a conditional pass, right? And the consequence for the conditional pass, they had problems with my oral presentation skills, so they sent me way over to Harvard College to, I can't remember what department was, but I basically had to go and take a mandatory public speaking experience for like a whole semester. And I'm like, nobody else had to do this. Now, in retrospect, it was probably a good thing, but like, I feel like, my story is that like at every point there was like a stumble, right? But finally, I got through it all and I finished in 2001. I won't talk too much about this because Renee's given me the thing and I'm looking at the slides. I'm talking way too much.
All good, though.
All good, yeah. So I'm going to get to, actually what I want to get to is this. Let's see. Sorry. Yeah. No, I think this is the best part. So, because it sort of, that title, like again, Nick asked me for a title many months ago, and I thought it was, and I came up with that title, and I thought it was kind of cool. Then I started like putting my stuff together, and I was like, oh, I got to live up to that title, right? But if you don't take anything away from it, other than this, the nudges to me were about like all those little signals, sort of gentle and sometimes not so gentle, sort of pushes to sort of get out of my comfort zone and sort of embrace that, if you think about like where I'm from and how, people of color are sort of taught to view themselves and women and all those kinds of things, like there were no sort of clear, obvious messages that somebody like me should be doing a STEM degree at some of the places that I've trained. And then beyond that, there's no sort of plethora of messages that people like me should, have the sorts of positions that I've had in my career. But sort of, recognizing that who cares what the messages are? If that's what I want, then that's what I should sort of push towards, right? And sometimes the pushes came from without, and sometimes the pushes come from within. The grit part is it wasn't always easy. It's pretty challenging graduate school, but you got to just push through those, right? And sort of pushing through those were things like, again, sort of recalling in my experience, even though people weren't telling me that I could do the STEM degree and mathy and all that kind of stuff, in my mind, once I sort of had the knowledge, like I had that stuff in my blood, right? So yes, I can. And sort of, even when it got tough to sort of, dig deep down and sort of figure out a way to sort of push through all that. And in some ways, again, it's not always a smooth path, but the challenges will sort of come and go. But, I call it adulting, which I don't always like to do. You just got to do it anyway, right? And then the grinding stuff is getting stuff done. So as undergraduates, what do I think about as grinding it out for you? Well, it really comes down to like graduate school currency and the application process, which you all went through when you applied to be undergraduates, is focus on your grades first, right? That is the main thing. Like, I sort of imagine when my 7-year-old is old enough and he's in school, like his job is school. That's what I'm going to tell him anyway. And that's how I would encourage you to think about your experience now. I think this is great. The second bullet, I think you're all right on point in that if you're thinking about graduate school, even if you're not thinking about graduate school, when you think about the next stage of your life, think of like what I think of as low-risk ways to sort of get some exposure, right? And so that includes things like coming to StatFest to learn a little bit more about statistics and biostatistics and data science, but you're not fully invested, right? It's low risk in that it costs you a day of your time, maybe a day and a half. Go to things like the diversity workshop at ENAR. plug for ENAR, and sort of figure out what you like, and most importantly, what you don't like, for those of you who are planning to go on to graduate school before you enrolled in the program, right? So I think it's probably worse to sort of be enrolled in a program and then figure out, this ain't for me, right? So as much as you can sort of spend time figuring out what you like and what you don't like in these low risk ways before you get to graduate school, I think is ideal. You want to think about applying and having the strongest application possible. Go visit places. Places are actually, especially universities who have graduate programs, they're so desperate to sometimes get people into their programs. They love it when people, make either, drop by or reach out to them and proactive about learning more about their programs, and often sort of can arrange really nice visits for you if you reach out to them. And then obviously, or maybe not so obviously, talk to the people who do the things that you think you might be interested in doing. Again, people like me, I mean, I've already talked too much, are more than happy to sort of share our experience. And so I end on time. As you're thinking about, this is sort of my overarching mantra all the time. And I can't remember who told me this. I should give this quotation proper credit. Sounds like DeJurin, did you say this? I don't know. Anyway, so when considering, and this is true at every stage of life, I think, so when you're thinking about what you want to do or what you want to be when you grow up, I think you should think about trying to do what you love, near the people you love, in a place that you love. And if you get 2 of those 3, right, then I think you're doing pretty well. I can take questions if there are any, and I'll make my slides available since I skipped through a bunch of it. So thanks.
To keep going too, but we did not say we would keep you all, till Sunday, and that's what it would take for all of us to give all of our stories. So we do have time if there's a question out there for Dr. Bellamy. Yes.
Hi, Scarlett. You talked about some of your challenges doing graduate school. Can you give us a few examples during your teaching career? Some of the grinds or ledges you had.
Sure, I got one that's fresh. So, well, actually, I'm going to talk about some. This may be slightly controversial, but I'm going to go there anyway. So, Renee mentioned in my bio that you have 2 immediate past presidents of ASA, and I'm the immediate past president of ENAR, and my term ended on December 31st of 2017, so last year. Shortly, probably a week or so before Thanksgiving, so mid-November, I get this panicked email. And who's heard of Kristen Lum? And the whole sort of sexual assault thing, right? So that came to my doorstep a month and a half before my term ended. And that was a huge challenge. So for people who aren't familiar with it, there were some accusations of sexual assault that happened at a different meeting, in a different organization than the one that I was currently president of for 8 more weeks or 6 more weeks. That ended up on my lap just as my term is ending. And so it was a big deal, and the idea was that, what is ENAR going to do about it? Because our meeting was the next meeting that was supposed to happen. Our meeting's in March. ASA is usually late July or early August. And people were like, I have my female faculty who don't want to come to this meeting until you say what you're going to do to sort of, keep them safe and make them feel welcome and protected at this meeting. So that was the thing that I had to sort of jump on and try and get sorted out before our meeting happened in March. And so I say that was a challenge in that nobody ever prepared me, to sort of think about how, we were going to address these kinds of challenges. And, in short time, we sort of had to come up with, some kind of a policy to sort of make it make it so that people would indeed register and show up at the meeting. And, you know, I like to say, and I don't take full credit for this, but like, you know, we had, it did not look as if our numbers suffered as a result of this sort of, this incident that happened. And we're still working it out. We're actually working through COPS with ASA and taking, you know, expressly sort of appreciative of their initiative and forming a task force and sort of trying to come up with something collectively that we'll work on together.
I'll take one more.
Yes.
How did you balance out like trying to help other people, like your cohort or people around your age while you know, going through graduate school while still trying to get your own career?
So the question is, if I understand correctly, the question is, how did I sort of balance out, like, you know, helping and being a good sort of collaborator with my cohort as a graduate student, I assume?
Yeah, as a graduate student or even family members, like helping them to mentor and stuff like that.
So I'll answer it as a graduate student first.
Okay.
So you think so the idea is that you think you're sort of, you know, a fellow student comes to you and they're like, hey, I don't understand like what's happening in inference, right? And you, in some ways, you're like, oh, I already got, you know, like usually it's like homework. Homework's a good example. I already did that problem. You know, I want to move on to the next thing. But when you think about it, when you have to explain it to somebody else, it's actually helping you. So my experience in graduate school is that most cohorts starting together, I mean, everybody is not like kumbaya tight and friendly. I mean, everybody's friendly, but like that level of being vulnerable and sort of sharing stuff that you know well and don't know so well happens with little groups of people. So that you know, the idea is that if you know, you bring everybody along. And I have to say that that has been my experience as a graduate student myself, and now being on faculty for many, many years. You know, it sort of happens organically with every incoming new cohort of students. So I think students sort of see it in their own best interest to make sure that, you know, that everybody understands. Mostly, and sometimes it's you who are sort of on the receiving end of the extra teaching, and sometimes you're sort of on the giving end. So I think people really sort of value that and sort of see that as a strength of, you know, your cohort, and that's just how grad school works. Nobody's ever going to get through it without. I shouldn't say that. Very few people can get through graduate school without some sort of group work.
Well, thank you so much.